In this video, I would like to discuss some ways that you can improve as a beginner or intermediate jazz student. A few things that I found over my years of teaching that have kind of held students back in one place and stopped them moving on as a player. I'd like to share a couple of points, but before I do, I'd like to tell you about a free beginner jazz guitar course which I've got available. Just before we begin the video, I'd like to tell you about a free beginner jazz guitar course which I have available for anyone that is new to learning jazz guitar. I've put this jazz guitar course together to break down jazz guitar in a coherent and structured way. There are over 25 4K video lessons and a 40-page downloadable PDF to help you get started. Each module comes with downloadable PDFs, chord diagrams, etudes and studies to help you get started learning the wonderful art of jazz. The first thing which I think holds a lot of players back is that they are simply not listening to enough jazz. I think sometimes people want to learn jazz because it's got kind of an elusive quality to it. You know, they think that if they learn to play jazz they can play anything, and it's got a certain mystique about it, and I think that's why people want to learn rather than being kind of enticed by the music. And you know, that often can show up in their playing, you know, or in their progress. So you've got to listen to jazz and you've got to know what it is you want to sound like, really, and that comes from initially listening before obviously kind of figuring out how you're going to sound. So here are a couple of questions that I'll ask you to see if you're doing enough listening. The first is, can you name me 3 different jazz piano players, 3 different jazz pianists? Can you name me 3 off the top of your head? Do you have to put your phone up and start scrolling to kind of think about what the names are? Or can you say Bill Evans, Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, Wynton Kelly? You know, you've got to kind of know jazz musicians like that, really, at least, you know, the common ones. I'm not saying that you've got to kind of be obsessive about knowing like every jazz piano player, but kind of a couple of the key ones, and you should really be able to do that with different kind of instrumentalists as well. So it might be upright bass players. You know, can you name me 3 different upright jazz bass players? Can you say Ray Brown, Paul Chambers, Ron Carter? You know, people like that that are really key figures in jazz bass, and obviously the same with jazz guitar, saxophone players especially. In fact, you should really be able to say 3 alto players, 3 tenor players, because that's such a big instrument in jazz. So if you can't do 3 for each of those, then you certainly need to be doing some more listening. The next one is, can you name me 3 classic jazz albums off the top of your head? 3 is quite a small number when it comes to jazz albums, really, but you know, one's from kind of the, you know, classic period of jazz, so to speak, so probably from 1940 till 1970. So you know, things like Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, Time Out by the Dave Brubeck Quartet, things like that. You know, classic jazz albums. Blue Train by John Coltrane. These are albums that you really want to know quite well, or at least have listened to them a couple of times and be familiar with them, because they kind of shape what jazz is, you know, or at least part of what jazz is. So it's a good idea to try and listen to some of the classic albums, and you can Google, you know, essential jazz albums or classics if you don't know them, but I think it'll really kind of change your opinion and change how you feel about learning jazz when you've listened to some of this. You know, once you've listened to what it should sound like, it will really help you in your progress as a guitar player. There is quite an important difference between listening and hearing. If you're listening to something and kind of passively consuming it, then you're not really kind of hearing what's going on. For example, you know, if you say, oh, okay, I like a certain player, what is it about a player that you like? Oh, I like such and such solo, Miles Davis solo on So What? Well, can you hum it? It doesn't have to be perfect, but can you hear it in your head? If not, you know, you need to really kind of listen to it in a deeper way to kind of gain connection with it. And it's not transcribing, which is obviously you know, a useful technique, but it's more just of kind of how you consume music. And I do think you can do this in a car. You know, you certainly can listen to it, and sometimes you can be a little bit guilty of going into passive listening. You know, sometimes I can be listening and I'll be thinking, oh, I really want to hear how such and such plays over these, you know, this tune, and then it'll go by and I'll think, I haven't actually listened to that, so you know, I'll press back and listen to it again properly, see if I can hum it, see if I can really listen to it, and Obviously the best place to do it is when you're just, you know, sat there listening to it properly, you know, put some headphones on, sit back and enjoy some music. It's becoming a little bit of a lost hobby, but I think it's a very beneficial thing to do when you're listening to things that you like, because you've got to know them on a deeper level rather than just kind of listening very passively. The second thing that's going to really help you move forward is to focus on tunes and application. Tunes and applications. So what does that mean? Well, basically you've got to learn jazz standards and apply language to the standards. Everything is kind of measured by what you can play over a tune, not just kind of, you know, an ad hoc lick here and there or random chords. You know, everything has to be in the context of music, which either means playing an accompanied solo, playing with a backing track, playing with a loop pedal, playing with actual people. That's kind of what's measurable and what kind of moves you on, not just kind of from learning things here and there. It's from learning jazz standards and applying what you learn and what you're practicing on over the jazz standards, so that they actually show and progress you and move you on. So if you listen to a jazz solo that you like and you learn a couple of licks, then you've got to apply them to Autumn Leaves, to Blue Bossa, that kind of thing, or else they're just never going to make an appearance. You know, you've got to apply what you're working on so it moves you on as a player. And it is better to really kind of focus on a small amount of jazz standards that you can feel very confident with. Even if, you know, you get to 5 jazz standards, that's still a great number if you can play them well, if you can memorize the melody, the chords, the harmony, and you can improvise over them. That's enough to go to a jam session, that's enough to have fun, and that's enough to start the ball rolling so that you can start advancing, you know, to become, if you're a beginner, to an immediate player, and then from an immediate player to an advanced player, you can start looking at other more challenging jazz standards like Have You Met Miss Jones or Someday My Prince Will Come, things like that, just to kind of keep the ball rolling. The next thing that you can do to really kind of move you on as a player is to record yourself and listen back. And I know that this can be challenging to do sometimes. It's not easy to record yourself and watch things back, but the students that do this, who I teach, some have done it, you know, almost week in, week out for several years. They make the most progress because it can do so much for you as a player. You have a little bit of pressure because the camera's rolling. You have measurable progress, which is, you know, sometimes not the easiest to address head on. You know, it's like if you're going on a diet, then you've got to step on the scales, and sometimes pressing record on the video is almost like stepping on the scales, and you kind of committing to the fact that you're going to have hopefully a before result and an after result, which is hopefully better. You know, sometimes you might dip down a little bit, and you know, the wave, as we all know, progress doesn't go like that. It kind of wavers up and down. But recording yourself is certainly a good way to do this. Now, there's 3 ways which I recommend students record themselves, all of which are useful depending on what you're doing. The first one, which most people do, is just using video. You know, getting your phone, pressing record, and trying to play over something. Now, this can be good and it can be bad. It's good because you know, you get something, and you know, most people don't do everything in one take. It may take them a couple of takes, and you know, you can learn a lot about yourself from the video. Obviously, the musical side of it, but sometimes what I can learn without any sound on is what mistakes people may be making, or what things they're not making, just by their kind of how they present themselves with the music. You know, if they present themselves and they've got a guitar but they're kind of glancing at some chords and not really engaging with what they're playing, or they're, you know, kind of not holding a pick properly, or they're just kind of, you know, they haven't memorized the music properly, things like that. And sometimes you'd be surprised, but just having a video of that, if you watch yourself back on that, you can almost tell that that might be the case. Sometimes they may just look really, really nervous and really anxious, and that's not good either. But if you're on a video and you watch that back yourself, you can think, oh, I look really nervous. Why you know, smile, relax, let's do it again, let's try to enjoy it. Those kind of things are valuable lessons which can often affect the performance, and they're only we're only able to see those on video, right? So I do think it is important to do videos for that reason. Now, the second thing is audio. I'm a big fan of doing audio to improve my own playing and I recommend it to students. Now, the reason why is because video is great, but it can be very kind of cumbersome, right? You know, you've got your phone, you press record, and then you've got to kind of turn the phone around, press stop record again. It's a big file, you have 8 takes and you've got to go through them, and you can't be bothered listening to them all because you've just basically played the same thing. So it can become kind of a, I don't know, a tiring process. Now, recording I find is much better. Obviously, if you've got something like an interface, that's really useful too. But if not, and you don't want to go down the kind of land of music tech, if you've got a simple program like Audacity on a computer for Windows or Mac, or if you've got voice recording on your phone, you can just press record very, very easily. And if you're trying to like work on a solo over something or work on a transcription, you can do it, and then you can quickly and very, very easily press stop, quickly listen back to it. And especially if you're on a computer, then you know you're pressing undo, you know, Control and Z or Command and Z, and you do it again, and it's a little bit better. So audio almost has like kind of a more faster way of getting the result that you hear in your head. So sometimes when I do audio recording, I don't do it like I do video. Video tends to be more of a kind of completionist mindset, where you're thinking, I'm doing the video to get it done and complete. The audio means that you're going to kind of sit down at, you know, a certain time and think, right, I've got, you know, half an hour or an hour. You don't intend to do it the first take, but you just do something to see what happens, and then you keep on refining it. And it's a very kind of enjoyable process, I find, compared to video, just because you can kind of very easily hear what you can amend and quickly do it, whereas the video changes all seem to be kind of more cumbersome to manage. So that's why I highly recommend audio. The third way which you should really record yourself, and this is a little bit more challenging, but you see a lot of people doing it in 2025, and that's recording themselves at jam sessions or at gigs. At jam sessions or gigs, this could be, you know, if you're just playing with a friend at a house, or if you've gone to a jam session, or if you're playing your own gig. Then if you can either set your phone recording on a music stand, maybe somebody else will record you, and that really kind of shows, because that is kind of the true and ultimate kind of way of seeing what you're like as a performer, which I know might be a little bit scary, but obviously when you play live, that's all you get, isn't it? You can't stop then start playing. When you're playing live, you start the song and you go until the end, hopefully, if you've rehearsed it and practiced it enough. So that's why it's almost that is very important, because if you watch a video of yourself playing, then that is kind of the true essence of what you're like. And that could often be a good thing, because for me, you know, I would much prefer a recording of myself playing live with good quality jazz musicians. There's a couple that I'm fairly happy with that I've done over the years on YouTube, where I'm, you know, playing at gigs and stuff, and I watch them back, and some of them I'm fairly happy with, to be honest with you. But I just can't replicate that at home. If I think I'm going to, you know, try and pull out the solo that I'm happy with over a backing track or a loop pedal, just here with kind of no atmosphere or no audience, then, I mean, you know, there's probably a couple of solos that I've done which I'm happy with at home, but, you know, for me, especially playing jazz, it's all about kind of what can happen when you're playing live with jazz musicians. The next thing that you really want to do to improve your playing is to try and play with others as much as possible. And this can be challenging depending on where you live. I remember I've taught occasionally people that live in very remote locations, like, you know, the middle of Australia or something like that, and sometimes there are literally there's no one around to jam. But even in them situations, there are things that do happen, like jazz guitar camps and jazz guitar workshops that you can travel to, and they're often like week-long events, weekend events, and they kind of encourage you to play with other people. I've been you know, part of those for I've been privileged enough to be part of the Wrexham Jazz Guitar Weekends, and that's all about getting people to play. So it's a very kind of, I'm lucky to have been part of that as a teacher, because that's what that does, it connects people. And even just fairly recently, there was a couple of people in one of the groups that I taught that they started their own WhatsApp group, and they get together and they play. So it can be a really kind of good way of connecting with people to jam in the future as well. But generally speaking, playing with other people, it was Peter Bernstein that once said sometimes an hour of playing with like either a jazz musician, especially that's on par with you or better, can be worth several in the practice room. And that is so true. I think that's a very kind of wise thing to consider. If you can kind of get in a jam with someone that's good, or at least on par with you, then that can mean so much more, because everything that you're practicing and playing has so much more meaning. It has a purpose. Whereas if you're just practicing by yourself, that's fun too. And don't get me wrong, I remember a couple of years ago I taught someone that I don't think ever got together with anybody to play, but he was just practicing all the time, and he did get pretty good. But there's a limit, and I think it's not just about the progress either, it's about the enjoyment. So a lot of the satisfaction, especially when you're playing something like jazz, is about playing with other people. So very, very important point to progress as a player too. The last point, and the last thing that often holds a lot of people back, is their lack of reading ability on the instrument. And that's not to say you've got to be a proficient reader in the sense of being able to kind of play a pick gig or to do a session gig. What I'm talking about is, being able to play something like Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, or something that just basically has, quarter notes and eighth notes with basic kind of keys like C major, G major, D major, etc. If you can spend just a couple of months getting a little bit of reading skills together, and ideally more than that, maybe a year or two, if you can just stick with reading, that will do so much for your technique, for your knowledge of notes on the fretboard, for your knowledge of keys. And it's one thing that I really do think it holds certain players back as well, especially if they want to begin to transcribe properly and they want to kind of write down and analyse what's going on. They just don't have enough kind of basic music theory knowledge, and that there isn't really kind of much point in doing standalone music theory. You might as well just be reading music. Start with like Mel Bay Book 1, start with Hal Leonard Book 1. It doesn't really matter what you do, and it might seem very, very basic at first, but if you can stick with that for at least a couple of months, and ideally a year or two, and even better, just have a little bit of reading as a part of your regular practice routine, then that is going to massively improve your jazz playing, and I would go as far as to say your overall playing as a guitar player and a musician too. So I hope that these points help you out, and if you are kind of stuck in a rut as a beginner intermediate player, then it could be one of these things. But if not, if you're kind of struggling with something else, then please leave a comment below and I'll try my best to help you out. Thank you for watching, and if you did enjoy this video, please remember to hit the subscribe button.